The story has been told so many times, passed from tongue to tongue, that it has become part of me. I can see it as clearly as if I had stood in that clearing myself. The witch's name was Serenya. Her hair was black as raven feathers, her eyes the color of storm clouds before the rain. She loved the Alpha, Kael's ancestor, with a devotion that burned hotter than any fire. But love, in the world of wolves, is a dangerous thing. It can bind you, yes, but it can also be used to break you. The Alpha betrayed her, not with another woman, but with ambition. He promised her the place at his side, the title of Luna, the right to run with him beneath the full moon. And then, when the council offered him a political marriage to unite two powerful packs, he took it without hesitation. Serenya was cast aside like a shadow at dawn. They say she didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. She simply stood in the center of the pack's sacred ground, lifted her hands to the moon, and called upon the oldest magic she knew. Her voice was a blade, her words poison, and the curse she wove that night was not meant to kill quickly. No, she wanted him to suffer. She wanted every alpha of his bloodline to know the agony of finding their true mate, only to watch them wither and die within a single moon cycle. The wind howled as she spoke the final words. The earth trembled, and the moon, the ever-watching moon, turned blood red. That was centuries ago, but the curse did not fade. It clung to the bloodline like frost to winter branches, waiting for the next heart to break. Now we come to Kael. Alpha Kael of the Blackthorn Pack, feared by his enemies, respected, and perhaps feared by his own wolves. He rules with precision, with discipline, with a heart encased in ice. Some say he was born cold. Others whisper that he was made that way, shaped by the deaths of the women who dared to love him. I have seen him only once before the day this story truly begins. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of midnight and eyes like pale steel. He moves like a predator, even when standing still. And when he looks at you, it's as if he can see every secret you've ever tried to hide. Kael does not smile. He does not laugh. He does not take a mate. The pack believes it is because he is too focused on his duty, but I know the truth. He has felt the curse's touch before, and he will not risk feeling it again. The day Aria arrived, the air was heavy with the scent of rain. The forest was restless, birds silent, leaves trembling though there was no wind. She came on foot, carrying nothing but a satchel slung across her shoulder and a stubborn set to her jaw. Aria was different, not just because she was human, though that alone was enough to make the pack wary, but because she walked into Blackthorn territory as if she belonged there. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, her eyes a green so vivid they seemed to catch the light. She was small compared to the wolves, but there was a fire in her that made her seem taller. She asked for sanctuary, said she was an herbalist, skilled in healing, and that she could be of use to the pack. Most alphas would have turned her away. Kael did not. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, curtly, and told her she could stay. For now. I remember thinking as I watched them from the edge of the clearing that something had shifted. The air felt charged like the moment before lightning strikes. Kael didn't know it yet, neither did Aria, but the curse had already stirred. The Blackthorn Pack's territory is not a place for the uninvited. The forest here is old, older than the pack itself, and it does not welcome strangers. The trees grow close together, their branches knitting overhead like the ribs of some great beast, shutting out the sun. The ground is thick with moss, soft enough to swallow the sound of footsteps. And always, always there is the feeling of being watched. Kael thrives here. He moves through the shadows as if they are part of him, his senses tuned to every rustle, every shift in the wind. The wolves under his command are loyal, but they keep their distance. They know better than to mistake his protection for affection. When Aria was brought to the pack settlement, a cluster of timber-built lodges and stone-walled halls, the eyes followed her. Some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. Humans are rare here, and rarer still are those who walk in without fear. Kael didn't introduce her to the others. He simply told the healer, an older she-wolf named Mara, to find her a place to sleep and put her to work. That was his way. No explanations, no reassurances. If Aria noticed the coldness in his tone, she didn't show it. I watched her in those first days. She moved with quiet purpose, gathering herbs from the forest's edge, grinding roots into pastes, brewing teas that filled the healer's lodge with sharp, earthy scents. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice was warm, the kind of voice that made you want to lean closer to hear what she might say next. Kael kept his distance, or at least he tried to, but I saw the way his gaze would linger when she passed. Not with hunger, no, Kael was too controlled for that, but with something sharper. Curiosity, perhaps, or the faint, unwelcome echo of hope. The nights in Blackthorn are long. The moon hangs low over the treetops, silvering the rooftops and turning the river into a ribbon of light. It was on one such night that I saw Kael alone on the training grounds, moving through the forms of combat like a dancer. His breath steamed in the cold air, his muscles coiled and released with lethal precision. Aria was there too, though she kept to the shadows. I don't think she meant to watch him. She had been returning from the healer's lodge with a bundle of dried herbs. But something in the way he moved must have caught her. She stood there for a long time, silent, her green eyes fixed on him. When Kael finally noticed her, he didn't speak. He simply lowered his weapon, straightened, and met her gaze. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Aria inclined her head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, and walked away. It should have ended there, but fate, as always, had other plans. The rogues came 2 nights later, 3 of them, lean and desperate, their eyes glowing with the madness that comes from too many moons without a pack. They slipped through the outer patrols, drawn by the scent of something unfamiliar, something human. Aria was alone, gathering water from the stream. She didn't hear them until it was too late. The first wolf lunged from the undergrowth, teeth bared. She stumbled back, the bucket spilling, her hand going instinctively to the small knife at her belt. It was a brave gesture, but useless against 3 full-grown wolves. And then, Kael was there. He hit the first rogue like a storm breaking, his claws flashing, his snarl splitting the night. The second wolf tried to circle behind him, but Kael moved with impossible speed, slamming it to the ground. The third fled before he even reached it. When it was over, Kael stood between Aria and the bodies of the rogues, his chest heaving, his eyes still burning with the wolf's light. She looked up at him, not with fear, but with something else. Recognition, perhaps, or the first flicker of hope. He didn't speak as he led her back to the settlement, but I saw the way his hand hovered near her elbow, as if ready to catch her should she stumble, and I saw the way she glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking. The curse had stirred, the first thread of the bond had been woven, and though neither of them knew it yet, the clock had already begun to tick toward the next full moon. That night, after the rogue attack, the settlement was quieter than usual. The wolves kept to their lodges, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the unspoken knowledge that danger had slipped past their defenses. I saw Kael walk Aria to the healer's lodge, his stride measured, his expression unreadable. He didn't touch her, but the space between them felt charged, like the air before a storm. Inside, Myra fussed over Aria, checking for wounds she insisted she didn't have. Kael stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the moonlight, watching. When Myra finally shooed him away, he didn't argue. He simply turned and walked into the night. I followed him, not close enough to be noticed, but near enough to see where he went. He didn't return to his quarters. Instead, he made his way to the edge of the forest, to a place where the trees thinned and the moonlight spilled like silver water over the ground. There, he stopped, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip. He tilted his head back, eyes closed, breathing in the night air as if it might steady him. His hands curled into fists at his sides. And then, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it, he spoke. Not again. 2 words. Heavy as stone, weighted with memory. I knew then that he had felt the curse's touch before, that somewhere in his past there had been another, someone he had cared for, perhaps even loved, and that the curse had taken her from him. And now, with Aria's arrival, the old fear had returned. Back in the healer's lodge, Aria lay awake. I could see her through the small window, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She was not afraid, not in the way most humans would be after facing rogue wolves. If anything, she looked resolved. I wondered what she saw when she looked at Kael. A protector, a danger, or something else entirely, something she couldn't yet name. The moon was high when Kael finally returned to the settlement. He passed the healer's lodge without looking in, but I saw the faintest flicker in his gaze as he walked by, a momentary hesitation, as if some part of him wanted to stop. He didn't. He kept walking, disappearing into the shadows.
I could feel it before I saw it. The shift in the air, the way the wind carried scents that didn't belong. The forest has its own language, and that night it spoke in whispers of warning. The moon was a pale, watchful eye above the treetops, its light spilling in silver ribbons across the ground. I'd been walking the patrol route for nearly an hour, my senses tuned to every rustle, every shadow. The pack was restless these days. The borders had been tested twice in the last week, and though we'd driven the intruders back, I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried again. I wasn't wrong. A faint snap of a twig reached my ears, too deliberate to be the careless step of a deer. I stilled, letting my breathing slow, my body melting into the darkness between 2 pines. The scent came next, musk, sharp with the tang of hunger and something fouler beneath it. Rogues. I moved silently, each step measured, my eyes scanning the undergrowth. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. Somewhere ahead, a low growl rumbled. Not loud, but enough to make the hair on my arms rise. And then I saw her. Aria. She was kneeling by the stream, her back to me, filling a bucket with water. The moonlight caught in her hair, turning it to molten silver. She didn't see them, the 3 shadows closing in from the trees. My pulse kicked hard. I didn't think, I moved. The first rogue lunged from the left, teeth bared, eyes wild. I was already shifting mid-stride, bones snapping, muscle stretching, fur bristling along my skin. The world sharpened. Scents, sounds, the thud of paws on earth. I hit the rogue before it reached her, the impact sending us both rolling through the ferns. The fight was fast, brutal. Claws raked, teeth tore, the air filled with snarls and the copper tang of blood. The second rogue tried to flank me. I spun, catching it by the throat, slamming it into the ground. The third hesitated, then bolted into the trees, its retreating form swallowed by the dark. When it was over, I stood over the bodies, my breath coming hard, my fur slick with blood that wasn't mine. Aria was frozen where she'd been, the bucket tipped over, water soaking into the dirt. I shifted back, the night air cool against my skin. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice rough from the change. She shook her head, but her eyes were wide, searching my face as if she were seeing me for the first time. I didn't know it then, but that night would change everything.
The forest was still humming with the echoes of the fight. Every step I took, I could feel the pulse of it in my bones. The raw, electric aftermath of claws meeting flesh, of instinct taking the reins. The rogue's scent still lingered in the air, sharp and acrid, but it was fading now, carried away by the night breeze. Aria walked beside me, silent. Her breathing was steady, but I could hear the faint hitch in it every so often, the kind that comes when adrenaline is still burning through your veins. She kept her eyes forward, but I could feel her glancing at me from the corner of her vision. I didn't look back at her. Couldn't. Not yet. The curse was a shadow at my shoulder, whispering its old, familiar warning. Don't let her in. I'd heard it before. I'd obeyed it before. And still, the memory of what it had cost me was carved deep enough to ache even now. The path wound through the trees, the moonlight spilling in broken patches across the ground. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, a low, mournful sound that seemed to hang in the air long after it faded. The settlement's lights were just beginning to glow through the branches ahead, warm and golden against the dark. I kept my stride even, my grip on the bucket firm. It was a small thing, carrying it for her, but it gave my hands something to do other than reach for her. The urge was there, to touch her arm, to reassure her, to feel the proof that she was unharmed, but I held it back. She didn't speak until we reached the edge of the clearing. "Thank you," she said quietly. 2 words, soft but steady. I nodded once, not trusting myself to answer. The healer's lodge was warm, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. Meera was waiting, her sharp eyes scanning Aria from head to toe before she even stepped inside. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice a mix of worry and irritation. "Rogues," I said simply. "Not hers," I added when her gaze caught on the blood on my skin. Meera ushered Aria to a stool, fussing over her with the brisk efficiency of someone who's seen too many close calls. I stayed in the doorway, the cool night air at my back, watching. Aria let Meera check her over without protest, though I could see the faint flush in her cheeks. When Meera finally straightened and declared her unharmed, I turned and stepped back into the night. I didn't wait for thanks. I didn't need it. The rain began not long after, a slow, steady drizzle that softened the edges of the world, turning the air cool and clean. I walked the perimeter of the settlement, the scent of wet earth rising around me, the sound of the drops on the leaves like 1,000 whispered secrets. Somewhere behind me, in the healer's lodge, Aria would be settling in for the night. Safe, for now. But the curse was awake. I could feel it. And I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that this was only the beginning.
The rain had eased by morning, leaving the world washed clean. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around the cabins and drifting between the trees like it had nowhere else to be. I'd been up since before dawn, patrolling the eastern ridge, but my mind hadn't been on the border. It had been on her. When I returned, the settlement was stirring, the smell of baking bread drifting from the communal hall, the sound of boots on wet earth. I caught sight of Aria near the well, her hair damp from the mist, her hands working the rope with practiced ease. She didn't see me at first. I should have kept walking. I told myself I would, but my feet slowed, then stopped. "Morning," she said when she finally noticed me, her voice light, but not careless. There was something in her eyes, not fear, not exactly, more like curiosity, like she was trying to read a language she'd never seen before. "You're up early," I said. It was a pointless observation, but it was safer than the truth. "I noticed you weren't in the healer's lodge." She smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep." Her gaze flicked to the bandage on my forearm. "You should let Meera check that." "It's fine." It wasn't, but I wasn't about to admit it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, like the air before a storm. I could feel the curse watching, waiting. It didn't like this, the way my guard was slipping, the way her presence was starting to feel less like a threat and more like something else. She broke the moment first, lowering the bucket into the well again. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking at me. I took the bucket from her when it came up full, my fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. It was nothing. It was everything. I walked away before the curse could whisper again, but the truth was already there, lodged deep enough that no amount of distance could shake it. The first crack had formed, and I knew, once a crack appears, it only grows. The day passed in fragments. patrol, reports, the endless rhythm of an alpha's duties. But beneath it all, there was a hum, low, insistent, like the vibration of a bowstring drawn too tight. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the treetops in molten gold, I knew I wouldn't be able to ignore it much longer. The curse was restless, and so was I. I found her by the river. She was kneeling at the edge, rinsing a bundle of herbs in the current. Her sleeves rolled to her elbows. The water caught the light, scattering it across her skin in shifting patterns. She didn't hear me approach, or maybe she did and chose not to turn. "You shouldn't be out here alone," I said. It came out sharper than I intended. Her hand stilled in the water. "I'm within the borders. That doesn't mean safe." She looked over her shoulder then, her eyes catching mine. There was no defiance in them, not exactly, but there was something else, something that made the curse coil tighter in my chest. "I can't stay locked away in the healer's lodge forever," she said. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. The truth tasted bitter. Because the truth was, I was asking, not with words, but with every instinct I had. Keep her close. Keep her contained. Keep her away from the part of me that could destroy her. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent that froze my blood. Rogues. Close. I was moving before I'd even thought about it, crossing the space between us in 3 strides. "Back to the settlement! Now!" She opened her mouth to argue, but the look on my face must have stopped her. She gathered her herbs quickly, and I took the lead, every sense straining. We didn't make it far before they appeared, 3 of them, stepping out from the trees like shadows peeling away from the dark. Their eyes glinted with hunger, their movements loose and predatory. I shifted without hesitation, the change ripping through me in a rush of heat and bone-deep power. The world sharpened, scents, sounds, the thud of my own heartbeat. The first rogue lunged, and I met him head-on, the impact reverberating through my frame. Claws, teeth, the copper tang of blood, it was all a blur of motion and instinct. I was dimly aware of Aria behind me, her breathing quick and shallow. One of the rogues broke past me, angling toward her, and the curse surged, a black tide of fury that drowned out everything else. I hit him before he reached her, slamming him to the ground with a force that cracked bone. I didn't stop. Couldn't. It wasn't until her voice cut through, sharp, urgent, that I realized I was still tearing into him long after he'd stopped moving. "Kael!" The sound of my name was a rope thrown into the dark. I seized it, dragging myself back from the edge. When it was over, the rogues lay still, the forest silent but for the ragged sound of my breathing. I shifted back, the cold air biting at my skin. She was staring at me, not with fear, but with something far worse. Pity. "You're hurt," she said, stepping toward me. I took a step back. "Stay there." Her brow furrowed. I said stay." The words came out harsher than I meant, but I couldn't let her close, not when the curse was still thrumming in my veins, hungry for more. We walked back in silence. The settlement's lights were a distant glow through the trees, but they felt a world away. When we reached the edge of the clearing, I stopped. "You go ahead." She hesitated, searching my face for something I couldn't give her. Then she nodded once and walked on, her figure swallowed by the light. I stayed in the shadows, watching until she disappeared from sight. The curse was quiet now, but I knew it was only biding its time. And as much as I wanted to believe I could keep her safe, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. The danger wasn't just out there in the forest. It was standing right here, in my own skin.
The days after the second rogue attack settled into a strange, fragile rhythm. The settlement was quieter, but not with peace, more like the hush before a storm. Kael had ordered Aria to work closely with Myera, the healer, under the guise of keeping her safe. But somehow, he always found a reason to pass through the healer's lodge. Sometimes it was to check on a wounded patrol member, sometimes to deliver supplies, and sometimes for no reason at all. Aria noticed. She didn't call him out on it, but she felt the weight of his gaze when she laughed with the pups who came to visit Myra. She caught the way his shoulders eased, just slightly, when he saw her unharmed. One afternoon, she was grinding herbs when Kael appeared in the doorway, a shallow cut across his palm. "You should be more careful," she murmured, taking his hand before he could protest. Her fingers were warm against his skin, her touch gentle but sure. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice was lower than usual, almost rough. She didn't look up. "Even alphas bleed." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Kael pulled his hand back, muttering something about patrol duties, and left. That night, Aria lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She told herself she was imagining it, the way his presence seemed to fill a room, the way her pulse quickened when he was near. But deep down, she knew she wasn't imagining anything. And Kael, pacing the length of his quarters, knew it too. The morning air was sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth when Aria volunteered to help Myra gather moonleaf, a rare herb that only grew in the shaded hollows beyond the patrol lines. Kael's voice cut through the healer's protest. "I'll go with her." Aria opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes, that unyielding steel, silenced her. They set out at dawn, the forest still heavy with mist. For a while, the only sounds were the crunch of boots on frost-hardened soil and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Kael kept a half-step ahead, scanning the shadows as though expecting trouble. When they found the moonleaf, Aria knelt to harvest it, her fingers deftly plucking the silver-veined leaves. That's when the faintest whimper reached her ears. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Kael was already moving toward the sound. They found a young patrol wolf slumped against a tree, his flank torn open. Blood darkened the snow beneath him. "Rogue?" Aria asked, dropping beside the injured wolf. Kael's jaw tightened. Or something worse. They worked in unison, Aria pressing herbs to the wound, and Kael binding it with strips torn from his own cloak. The wolf's breathing steadied, but the forest around them had gone unnervingly still. A snap of a branch. Kael's hand shot out, pulling Aria against him as a shadow lunged from the undergrowth. A lone rogue, eyes wild, teeth bared. Kael met it mid-leap, the impact driving them both into the snow. Aria's heart pounded as she scrambled for a fallen branch, swinging it hard to knock the rogue off balance. Kael was on his feet in an instant, driving the attacker back until it fled into the trees. For a moment, they just stood there, breathless, snow swirling between them. Kael's hands were still on her arms, his grip firm but not rough. "You're shaking," he said. "So are you," she replied. Neither moved until the injured wolf groaned, breaking the spell. They got him back to the settlement without another word, but the memory of that moment, the heat of his body against hers, the way his eyes had locked on hers, lingered long after. The settlement was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that made every creak of timber and whisper of wind feel amplified. Most of the pack had turned in early after a long day of repairs and patrols. Aria wandered the narrow paths between cabins, drawn by the faint metallic rasp of steel on stone. She found Kael seated on a low bench outside his quarters, sharpening a long hunting knife. The firelight from a nearby brazier painted his face in shifting gold and shadow. "You're still awake," she said softly. His eyes flicked up, catching hers for a moment before returning to the blade. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't answer, but he shifted enough to make space beside him. The bench was warm from his body heat, and she could smell the faint scent of pine and leather clinging to him. For a while they sat in silence, the steady scrape of the whetstone filling the space between them. Finally, Aria spoke. "You saved my life today." Kael's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have been out there." "I can take care of myself." "I know," he said, and there was something in his tone, Not dismissal, but a reluctant respect. The forest isn't safe. Not for you. Not now. She studied him in the firelight. You talk like something is coming. He set the knife down, staring into the flames. Something is always coming. There was a weight in his voice that made her chest ache. She wanted to ask more, but instead she said, "You've been carrying this, whatever it is, alone for a long time." His gaze shifted to her, sharp and searching, as if deciding whether to let her in. "There's a reason I keep my distance, Aria. People close to me, they don't stay safe." She didn't flinch. "Maybe you should let them decide if they want to take that risk." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Kael looked away, his voice low. "When I was younger, I lost someone. The curse, it took them from me. I swore I'd never let it happen again." The word hung between them. Curse. Heavy with unspoken meaning. Aria's fingers curled in her lap. "I don't know what this curse is, Kael, but I know you're not the kind of man who gives up without a fight." Something flickered in his eyes, not hope exactly, but the faintest crack in the wall he'd built around himself. She smiled just a little. "Besides, you're terrible at keeping your distance." That earned her the ghost of a smirk, gone almost as soon as it appeared. But it was enough. The moon was waxing, its pale light spilling over the settlement like a silent warning. Kael had been restless all evening, pacing the perimeter long after the patrols had returned. Sleep didn't come easily to him anymore, not since the bond had begun to take root. That night, when it finally did, it came in the form of a nightmare. He was standing in the forest, the air thick with the copper tang of blood. Aria was ahead of him, her back turned, her white dress blooming red at the hem. No matter how fast he ran, the distance between them never closed. Then she turned, and her eyes were not her own. They were the curse's eyes, black, endless, and hungry. Kael woke with a start, his chest heaving, sweat chilling his skin. The pole in his chest, the bond, was a live wire, thrumming with something dark. He stepped outside into the cold night air, trying to steady his breathing. "Kael?" Her voice was soft, but it cut through the fog in his mind. Aria stood in the doorway of the healer's lodge, wrapped in a thin shawl. "You're shaking," she said, stepping toward him. He almost told her to go back inside. Almost. But when her hand touched his arm, the words died in his throat. "I'm fine," he lied. She frowned, her gaze dropping to her own wrist. That's strange. A faint mark was blooming on her skin, a thin, dark line curling like smoke beneath the surface. Kael's stomach dropped. He knew that mark. The curse wasn't just stirring in him anymore. It was reaching for her. "Aria," he said, his voice low, urgent. "You need to rest. Stay close to Mayra. Don't go anywhere alone." She searched his face, sensing the fear he was trying to hide. "This is about you, isn't it? About whatever you've been keeping from me?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was worse than anything she could imagine, and now it was already too late to keep her untouched by it. The healer's lodge smelled of crushed herbs and smoke, but beneath it lingered the faint metallic tang of fear. Aria lay on a cot, her skin pale, the strange mark on her wrist now curling higher toward her elbow, like ink spilled beneath the skin. Mayra's expression was grim as she worked, grinding a poultice with quick, efficient movements. "It's spreading faster than I thought," she murmured. "If we don't slow it, she'll—" "Don't finish that sentence," Kael snapped, his voice low but sharp. Mayra's eyes met his, steady. "You can't protect her from this by pretending it isn't happening. The bond is feeding the curse, and the more you fight it, the more it fights back." Kael's hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to argue, but the truth was already carved into Aria's skin. When Mayra stepped away to fetch more supplies, Kael moved to Aria's side. She stirred, her lashes fluttering open. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice rough. "Where else would I be?" Her lips curved faintly. "You've been trying to push me away since the moment we met. I thought maybe maybe you'd finally succeeded. Kael sank to one knee beside the cot, his hand hovering over hers before he finally let his fingers close around hers. I thought if I kept my distance, you'd be safe, but I was wrong. The curse doesn't care about distance. It only cares about taking. Her gaze searched his face. Then stop running from it. From me. The words hit him like a blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He had been running, not just from the curse, but from the possibility of losing her the way he'd lost before. I'm afraid. Not of dying, of watching it take you and not being able to stop it. Her fingers tightened around his. Then don't let it. Fight it. With me. For a long moment they just looked at each other, the air between them thick with everything unspoken. Then Kael nodded once, a silent vow. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters like a warning, but inside, for the first time, they stood, together, against what was coming. The settlement felt different now, not in the way seasons shift, slow and inevitable. This was sharper, like the air itself had teeth. I could hear them before I saw them, low voices curling through the timber walls of the council hall, words clipped short when I passed. My name, Kael's name, the word curse, whispered like it might summon something if spoken too loud. Inside, the council sat in a half-circle, their eyes tracking me as if I were a wolf that had wandered too close to their fire. Kael stood at the center, shoulders squared, jaw tight. She is under my protection, he said, voice steady but carrying that dangerous edge I'd learned to recognize. And until I say otherwise, she remains here. A murmur rippled through them. One of the elders, a man with silver hair and eyes like cold steel, leaned forward. Your protection is one thing, Alpha, but the pack's safety is another. We've all seen the mark. We've heard the stories. Kael's gaze flicked to me, just for a heartbeat, and in that glance I saw the truth. He was fighting for me, but every word cost him ground with his own people. When the meeting broke, I lingered in the shadows outside, listening. She's a danger. He's blinded by her. If the curse spreads. The rest was swallowed by the wind, but it didn't matter. I'd heard enough. By the time Kael found me, the weight of their suspicion had already settled on my shoulders. They're afraid, I said quietly. They'll get over it, he replied, but his voice was too quick, too certain, the kind of certainty you use when you're trying to convince yourself. And for the first time since I'd arrived in Blackthorn, I wondered if I truly belonged here, or if I was just the crack forming in the pack's foundation. The first thing I noticed was the heat, not the kind that comes from a fire or the sun, but the kind that seeps from within, fever hot and wrong. Aria's skin was flushed, her breathing shallow. The mark on her wrist, once a faint curl of shadow, had darkened, the tendrils creeping higher toward her elbow. It looked like smoke trapped beneath glass, writhing just beneath the surface. Mayra hovered over her, muttering under her breath as she mixed a paste of crushed moonleaf and frost root. It's moving faster, she said, without looking at me. Faster than I've ever seen. I could feel it too, a low, insistent thrum in my chest, like a second heartbeat that wasn't mine. The bond. Every time her pulse quickened, mine did too. Every time she winced, a phantom ache hurtled through me. Mayra's eyes flicked up, sharp. You're feeling it, aren't you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She set the bowl down with a thud. Then you know what I'm about to say. The only way to slow this is to weaken the bond. The words landed like a blow. No. Kael, I said no. Her gaze didn't waver. If you don't, the curse will burn through her before the next full moon. You can't fight it and keep her close. You have to choose. Choose. As if there was a choice. That night, I sat in my quarters, the fire burning low, the shadows long. The bond was a constant pull, tugging me toward her. I could feel her restlessness, her discomfort, even from across the settlement. I told myself I wouldn't go to her, that I'd give her space, give the bond room to loosen. But the longer I sat there, the more the pull became a demand. By the time I reached the healer's lodge, I'd stopped pretending I had any control over it. She was awake, propped up on one elbow, the lamplight painting her skin in gold and shadow. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. "Neither should you," and the corner of her mouth lifted despite the fever in her eyes. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. My hand hovered over hers, not quite touching. "We'll find a way to stop this," I said. Her gaze held mine, steady despite the exhaustion, then stopped looking at me like I'm already gone. The bond flared between us, hot and sharp, and I knew Mara was wrong about one thing. Distance wouldn't save her. It would only kill us both more slowly. The first howl came just before dawn. It wasn't one of ours. I was already awake. The bond had kept me restless all night, and the sound cut through the fog in my head like a blade. It was low, guttural, and wrong. A challenge, but not the kind that came from a rival pack. This was something older. By the time I reached the watch post, the eastern sky was bleeding pale light over the tree line. Ryan was there, bow in hand, eyes fixed on the forest. "They're moving closer," he said without turning. "They?" He nodded toward the shadows between the trees. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. Shapes, too tall and too thin to be wolves, slipping between the trunks. Mara appeared at my side, her face grim. She said, "Wraithborn. They shouldn't be this far south." The name was enough to make my stomach knot. Wraithborn were carrion spirits given form, drawn to weakness, to sickness, to the scent of a curse. Aria. I didn't wait for orders. I was already moving, boots pounding the frost-hard ground toward the healer's lodge. She was sitting up when I burst in, eyes wide, the fever flush still on her cheeks. "I heard them," she said. "They're here for you." I told her, and the words tasted like ash. Her jaw tightened. "Then we don't let them take me." It should have been that simple. But the bond was a beacon. Every heartbeat, every breath, a flare in the dark that would draw them straight to us. Mara arrived moments later, carrying a satchel of charms and salt. "We can ward the lodge, but it won't hold if they come in force. You'll have to move her." "Move her where?" I demanded. "The old stone circle. The wards there are older than the pack itself. If anything can mask the bond, it's that place." I didn't like it. The stone circle was deep in the forest, and the Wraithborn would be between us and it. But staying here meant waiting for them to tear through the walls. Aria swung her legs over the side of the bed. "Then we go now." We left under a sky the color of tarnished silver, the air sharp with the scent of frost and pine. Ryan took point, Mara behind him, Aria between us, and me at the rear. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals, just the crunch of our boots and the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of something moving parallel to us. The first attack came fast, a blur of pale limbs and black eyes lunging from the undergrowth. Ryan's arrow took it in the throat, but it didn't fall. It just dissolved, like smoke in wind. "They're testing us," Mara said, finding the edges of our strength. We pushed on, now faster. The bond was a live wire in my chest, every flicker of Aria's fear sparking through me. By the time the stones came into view, ancient monoliths half buried in moss, the shadows between the trees were thick with movement. We crossed into the circle, and the air changed. The pressure in my chest eased, the bond's pull dimming to a faint hum. The Wraithborn stopped at the edge, pacing, their eyes like shards of obsidian. For now, we were safe. But as I looked at them, dozens of them, silent and waiting, I knew this wasn't over. The curse had called them here, and they wouldn't leave until they had what they came for. The first stone struck just after nightfall. It clattered against one of the monoliths, the sound sharp in the stillness. A warning. We'd ringed the circle with salt and iron filings, Mara's charms hanging from the stones like strange fruit. The air inside the ward was heavy, almost humming, but it kept the Wraithborn at bay, for now. Aria sat near the central stone, her knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the wards. The fever had eased, but the mark on her arm was still spreading, curling up toward her shoulder like black ivy. "They're restless," she said quietly. I followed her gaze. The Wraithborn were pacing just beyond the circle, their movements jerky and unnatural, their pale faces catching the moonlight. Every so often, one would dart forward, testing the invisible barrier, only to recoil with a hiss. They'll wait until we're tired, until we slip. Rin was checking his arrows for the third time. Then we don't slip. The first breach came hours later. It started with a sound, a low, keening wail that made the hairs on my arms rise. The wards shimmered, the air rippling like heat over stone. Then one of the Wraithborns stepped through. It was taller than the others, its limbs too long, its mouth stretched into something that might have been a smile. The charms rattled violently, and Mara shouted something in the old tongue, thrusting a talisman toward it. The thing didn't flinch. I was moving before I thought, blade in hand. The Wraithborn's skin was cold and slick under my grip, its strength inhuman. I drove the blade up under its ribs, and it let out a sound like tearing cloth before dissolving into smoke. But the wards had been weakened, more shapes pressed at the edges, their eyes glinting. The next minutes were chaos. Rin's arrows flew, Mara's voice rose in a constant chant, and I fought anything that crossed the threshold. The air was thick with the smell of iron and something sweeter, rot and decay. Through it all, I kept track of Aria. She was on her feet now, one hand pressed to the mark on her arm, her face pale but determined. Then I felt it, a sudden sharp pull in the bond, like a hook in my chest. I turned just in time to see one of the Wraithborn break through behind her. I didn't think. I moved. The thing's hand was inches from her when I slammed into it, driving us both to the ground. Its claws raked my shoulder, cold fire searing through me, but I didn't let go until it dissolved into nothing. When I looked up, Aria was staring at me, her eyes wide. "You're hurt," she said. I shook my head. Not as bad as it could have been. But the truth was, the wound burned in a way that felt too much like her curse. By the time the sky began to pale, the Wraithborn were gone. The wards were in tatters, the ground inside the circle littered with ash and broken charms. We'd survived the night, but as I sat there, my shoulder throbbing, the bond humming low and dangerous between us, I knew the siege had only been the beginning. The curse was spreading, in her, and now, maybe, in me. And whatever came next, we'd face it together. The morning after the siege, the forest felt wrong, too still, too clean, as if the night's violence had been swallowed whole, leaving only the memory of it behind. Mara was already working when I woke, grinding herbs, muttering to herself, her hands moving with the precision of someone who knew time was running out. My shoulder throbbed where the Wraithborn's claws had raked me, but I said nothing. Aria was pale, the mark on her arm now curling over her collarbone like a black tide. She caught me looking and shook her head. "Don't," she said. "We both know what it means." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned to Mara. "You said there was a way to break it." Her eyes flicked up. "I said there might be, but it's not here. Not in this forest." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside was a map, old, the parchment brittle, the ink faded to the color of dried blood. "This," she said, "is the last record of the Ash and Bone Path. It leads to the Hollow Spire, a place where the veil between life and death is thin enough to be cut. If the curse can be severed, it will be there." Ren leaned over my shoulder. "That's deep in the Blackfen. No one comes back from there." Mara's gaze didn't waver. "Then you'd better make sure you do." We left at first light. The bond was a constant hum between us. But here, away from the wards, it was sharper, more insistent. I could feel Aria's exhaustion, her pain, and, beneath it all, her resolve. The Blackfen was a place of stories whispered to frightened pups, a swamp where the ground could swallow you whole, where the air itself could turn your thoughts against you. But the map was clear, and the path was marked by cairns of bone-white stone that seemed to glow faintly in the mist. By midday, the trees had grown twisted, their branches clawing at the sky. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of rot. Somewhere in the distance, something moved, slow, deliberate, and far too large to be anything we wanted to meet. We made camp on a patch of high ground, the fog curling around us like smoke. Aria sat close to the fire, her eyes on the map. "If this is right," she said, "we'll reach the spire in 2 days." "And if it's wrong?" Ren asked. She looked up, meeting my gaze. "Then we find another way. Or we don't." The bond flared at her words, a sharp ache in my chest. I wanted to tell her that failure wasn't an option, that I wouldn't let her go. But the truth was, the Blackfen didn't care about what we wanted. The Blackfen doesn't welcome visitors. It swallows them. By the second day, the air was so thick with mist it felt like breathing through wet cloth. The ground squelched under every step, and more than once Ryan's boot sank deep enough that we had to haul him out by the arms. The cairns of bone-white stone were our only guide, each one leaning at odd angles, their surfaces edged with runes so old they'd worn almost smooth. Mayara said they were markers left by the first wolves to cross this place, a warning as much as a path. The deeper we went, the more the swamp seemed to press in. The trees grew twisted, their roots like skeletal fingers clutching at the earth. The water was black, still, and too quiet. No frogs, no insects, just the sound of our own breathing and the occasional ripple that came from nowhere. It started with whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the reeds, but then I heard my name. Kael. I froze, scanning the mist. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was hers, not Aria's voice as it was now, but as it had been years ago, before the curse had taken her, the one I'd lost. I knew it wasn't real. The Blackfen was known for this, drudging up what you feared most, what you wanted most, and wearing it like a mask. But knowing didn't make it easier to ignore. When I glanced at Aria, I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted to shadows that weren't there. She was hearing something too. By midday, the ground had turned to a patchwork of slick mud and shallow pools. We moved slower, every step a gamble. That's when the first of them appeared, shapes in the mist, half-formed, their features shifting like smoke. They didn't attack, not yet. They just watched. Ryan muttered a curse under his breath. Fen wraiths. Mayara's voice was tight. Don't look them in the eyes. Don't answer if they speak. Easier said than done. One of them drifted closer to Aria, its face settling into something that looked like her mother's. "Come with me," it whispered. "You don't belong with them." I stepped between them, my hand closing around Aria's wrist. The bond flared hot at the contact, a pulse of shared fear and defiance. The wraith's smile widened, and then it melted back into the mist. We made camp on a narrow spit of dry ground, the cairn just visible through the fog. No one spoke much. The swamp had a way of making words feel dangerous, like they might draw something closer. Aria sat beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. "It's trying to get in our heads," she said quietly. "It won't," I told her. But even as I said it, I could feel the Blackfen pressing against the edges of my mind, looking for a way in. And I knew, before we reached the hollow spire, it would try again. The first glimpse of the hollow spire came through the mist like a blade of shadow against the pale sky. It rose from the swamp's heart, a jagged tower of black stone, its surface slick with moss and age. The air around it was colder, sharper, as if the world itself was holding its breath. We approached in silence, the cairns leading us to a narrow causeway of stone that cut through the black water. The spire loomed higher with every step, its peak lost in the low clouds. Aria's breathing was shallow, her hand pressed to the mark on her shoulder. The bond between us was a taut wire, humming with something I couldn't name. Not just fear, but recognition. "This is it," Mayra said, her voice low. "The place where the veil thins." Inside, the spire was hollow, its walls lined with carvings so old the edges had crumbled. The floor was a mosaic of bone and obsidian, the pattern spiraling inward to a raised dais at the center. Aria stepped toward it, her eyes fixed on the carvings. "I've seen this before, in my dreams." The bond flared, and for a moment I saw what she saw, a woman standing where Aria stood now, her hair black as midnight, her eyes like storm clouds. Serenya, the witch who had cursed my bloodline. Only, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Aria. The vision hit like a blow. Serenya's voice was a whisper in my skull. "Blood calls to blood. The curse is not mine alone, it is hers." Aria staggered, clutching her head. I caught her before she fell, the bond burning between us. "She's part of it," Mayra said, her face pale. "Her bloodline is tied to the curse. That's why it's moving so fast." Aria's eyes met mine, wide and stricken. "If that's true, then breaking it means breaking me." The words hung in the cold air, heavier than stone. We didn't have time to answer. The shadows in the corners of the spire shifted, peeling away from the walls. Figures emerged, not wraithborn, not rogues, but something older, their forms flickering between flesh and smoke, guardians of the spire. The largest of them stepped forward, its voice a low grumble. "To sever the curse, one must give what was taken. Life for life, blood for blood." Aria's hand tightened on mine. "Kael." "No," I said, the word a growl, but the truth was already there, carved into the stone beneath our feet. There would be no cure without a cost. The guardians closed in, their shapes shifting like smoke caught in a windless room. Their eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with a dim, cold light, as if lit from within by dying embers. Aria's fingers were still locked around mine, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against my skin. The bond between us was a live wire now, every breath she took echoing in my chest. "Life for life," the guardian repeated, its voice like stone grinding on stone. "Blood for blood. The curse will not break without the price." I stepped forward, keeping Aria behind me. "Then take mine." The guardian tilted its head, the movement slow, deliberate. "It is not your blood that binds the curse, it is hers." The words landed like a blade in my gut. I felt Aria flinch, but she didn't speak. Mara's voice cut through the silence. "There must be another way, a binding, a transference." "There is no other way," the guardian said, and the others echoed the phrase in a whisper that filled the hollow spire. "The curse was forged in blood. It will end in blood." Aria's hand slipped from mine. She stepped forward, her face pale, but her eyes steady. "If it ends with me, then it ends. I won't let it take anyone else." "No," I said, the word raw in my throat. Her gaze met mine, and for a moment the bond between us was a storm. Grief, fear, love, and something I couldn't name, all tangled together. "You think I want this? You think I haven't fought it every step of the way? But if my blood is the key, then keeping me alive means keeping the curse alive. How many more will it kill?" I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there had to be another way. But the truth was, I didn't know. Mara stepped closer, her eyes darting between us. "There is a ritual," she said slowly. "It would bind the curse to another host, but it's dangerous. If it fails—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Who would take it?" Aria asked. Mara's gaze settled on me. The bond between Aria and me pulsed, as if it had heard and understood. I felt the weight of the choice settle on my shoulders. If I took the curse, I could spare her, but I'd be binding myself to the same fate that had haunted my bloodline for generations, and there was no guarantee I'd survive long enough to break it. Aria shook her head. "No, I won't let you do that." "You don't get to decide that alone," I said, throwing her words back at her. The guardians watched in silence, their forms flickering in the dim light. Mara began to draw a circle on the obsidian floor with a shard of bone, her movements precise. If you're going to choose now. The spire won't hold the veil open for long. Aria's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Kael, if you take this from me, you'll die. Maybe. But I'd rather die on my feet than watch you fade away. She stepped closer, her hand on my chest. And I'd rather die than watch you become what I've seen in my dreams. The bond flared again, and for a heartbeat I saw it, myself, twisted and hollow, my eyes burning with the same cold light as the Guardians. The choice was a blade with no safe edge. I looked at Mara. If I take it, can it still be broken? She hesitated. Maybe, but it would have to be done quickly, and the breaking would be violent. The Guardians shifted, their whispers rising like wind through dead leaves. Choose. Aria's hand tightened on mine. Kael. I choose, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The circle Maira had drawn glowed faintly, the bone dust shimmering as if lit from beneath. The Guardians stood at its edges, their forms wavering, their whispers rising in a low, rhythmic chant. Aria's hand was still in mine, trembling. Kael, don't. I stepped into the circle. The air inside was heavier, pressing against my skin like water. The bond between us flared, and I felt her fear as if it were my own. Maira's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her urgency. Kneel, place your hand over the mark. I did as she said. Aria moved to follow, but the Guardians blocked her path, their shapes solidifying into something almost human. This is my choice, and I'm making it for both of us. Maira began the incantation, her words curling through the air like smoke. The circle's glow intensified, and the mark on Aria's shoulder burned bright, the light spilling through the fabric of her tunic. The bond between us twisted, pulling taut until it felt like it might snap. I gritted my teeth as the heat from her mark spread into my chest, searing through muscle and bone. I saw flashes, Serenya's face, the moment she cast the curse, the blood that sealed it, then my own reflection, eyes burning with the same cold fire as the Guardians. Aria screamed my name. The pain was a tide, dragging me under. I felt the curse moving, a living thing, clawing its way from her blood into mine. It was heavier than I'd imagined, a weight that braced against my ribs, my skull, my very thoughts. Maira's voice rose, the final words of the ritual cutting through the roar in my ears. The circle flared white, and then silence. I collapsed forward, my hands hitting the cold obsidian. The bond between us was still there, but different, muted, as if a wall had been built between our hearts. Aria's hand knelt beside me, her hands on my face. Kael, what have you done? The Guardians stepped back, their forms beginning to dissolve into the shadows. The largest one spoke, its voice softer now. The curse is bound anew, but the breaking will come and it will demand its own price. Maira helped me to my feet. My body felt wrong, heavier, slower, as if something inside me was watching, waiting. Aria's eyes searched mine. We'll find a way to break it, together. I wanted to believe her, but in the back of my mind I could already hear the whisper of the curse, patient and hungry. As we left the hollow spire, the mist closed in behind us, swallowing the tower whole. The cairns were gone, the path back to the Black Fen lost. We didn't speak. The bond between us was still there, but it no longer sang with the same warmth. Something cold had taken root in me, and I knew, when the time came to break the curse, it might not be Aria's life on the line anymore. It might be mine.
The first thing I felt was the cold, not the damp chill of the Black Fen or the hollow spire, but something deeper, a cold that lived under the skin, in the marrow. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat, each thud a reminder that the curse was no longer out there, hunting me. It was inside. I opened my eyes to a sky the color of tarnished steel. The air smelled of wet stone and old ash. Aria was kneeling beside me, her hair plastered to her face with mist, her eyes searching mine as if she could see the thing coiled in my chest. "You're awake," she said, but her voice was careful, as though the wrong word might shatter something fragile between us. I tried to sit up. My limbs felt heavier than they should, my muscles slow to obey. The bond between us was still there. I could feel her heartbeat, the warmth of her skin, but it was muted, as though a veil had been drawn over it. Myra stood a few paces away, her staff planted in the wet earth. "We need to move. The spire won't stay quiet for long." I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the way the world tilted for a moment. The mist was closing in again, swallowing the jagged silhouette of the hollow spire behind us. Aria rose with me, her hand brushing mine, but not holding it. That absence was sharper than I expected. We started walking, the ground beneath us shifting from slick stone to the spongy, root-tangled soil of the Black Fen's edge. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the distant croak of unseen creatures. It didn't take long for the first sign to come. A flicker in the corner of my vision, a shadow that moved when nothing else did. I turned my head, and for a heartbeat I saw one of the guardians standing among the trees, its form wavering like heat over stone. I blinked, and it was gone. "You saw something," Aria said quietly. I didn't answer. By the time we reached the ridge above the fen, the sky had darkened. The wind carried the scent of rain, and something else, like metallic, like blood. We made camp in the shelter of a half-collapsed watchtower, its stones slick with moss. Myra busied herself with the fire, muttering under her breath. Aria sat across from me, her knees drawn up, her gaze fixed on the flames. "You're different," she said finally. I met her eyes. "It's only been a day." "It doesn't take long," she said. "I know what it felt like. The way it whispers. The way it waits." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I could handle it. But the truth was I could already feel it. A slow, steady pressure at the edges of my thoughts, like a tide creeping in. That night, the dreams came. I was standing in the hollow spire again, but the walls were closer, the air thicker. Serenya stood before me, her eyes the same cold light as the guardians. "You carry me well," she said, her voice curling through the air like smoke. "Better than she did." I tried to speak, but my mouth was full of ash. "You think you can break me?" she asked. "You are me now, and when the time comes, you will choose as I chose." Her hand touched my chest, and I felt the curse stir, stretching like a predator waking from sleep. I woke with my heart pounding, the taste of ash still in my mouth. The fire had burned low. Aria was awake, watching me. "Nightmares?" she asked. "Something like that." She didn't press, but her eyes lingered on me a moment longer before she turned back to the fire. I lay back down, staring at the crumbling ceiling of the watchtower. The cold in my bones was still there, steady and patient. And somewhere in the darkness, I thought I heard Serenya's voice again. Softer this time, almost gentle. "We have time."
The ashwood was a graveyard of trees. Their trunks were blackened and split, their branches clawing at the sky like the fingers of the dead. Ash drifted in the air, clinging to our clothes, our hair, our skin. Every step stirred it into small, choking clouds. We moved in single file along a narrow game trail, Myra at the front, Aria behind her, and me bringing up the rear. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of ash underfoot and the occasional groan of a dying tree shifting in the wind. It wasn't until the third hour that I felt it, the prickle at the back of my neck, the sense of eyes on us. "Keep moving," I murmured, my hand drifting to the hilt of my blade. Aria glanced back at me, her brow furrowed. She didn't need to ask. She could feel it too, faintly, through the bond. The first arrow came from the left, hissing through the air to bury itself in the trunk beside Myra's head. She didn't flinch, just raised her staff and barked a word that sent a ripple of force through the trees. Figures emerged from the ash-choked undergrowth. Half a dozen, maybe more. Their faces were hidden behind soot-stained scarves, their eyes hard. Hunters. I stepped forward. They're after me. One of them spoke, his voice muffled. The curse dies with you. They came fast. I moved faster. The curse surged in my veins, a cold fire that sharpened my senses and made the world slow around me. I could see the arc of each blade, the twitch of each muscle before a strike. My body moved before I thought, sidestepping, striking, breaking bone. It was over in moments. The ash settled slowly, drifting down over the bodies at my feet. I stood there, breathing hard, my hands slick with blood. The cold inside me was humming, satisfied. Aria was staring at me, her eyes wide. Kael, what did you do? I looked down at my hands. The truth was, I didn't know. I remembered moving, striking, but there were gaps, moments where I wasn't sure if it was me or the curse guiding my blade. Myra's voice was grim. This is only the beginning. The curse will make you stronger, faster, but it will take pieces of you each time you use it. We stripped what supplies we could from the hunters and moved on, the ash swallowing their bodies behind us. That night, by the fire, Aria didn't sit beside me. She kept her distance, her gaze fixed on the flames. I could feel her through the bond. Not fear exactly, but something colder. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd done what I had to do. But in the quiet, with the ash still clinging to my skin, I could hear Serenya's voice again, soft and approving. You see, we are stronger together. The ashwood thinned into a barren slope of pale stone, the air growing colder with each step. At the crest, the land fell away into a hollow where jagged shards of crystal jutted from the ground like the ribs of some long-dead beast. This is it, Myra said, her voice low, the oracle's seat. The crystals caught what little light there was and fractured it into shifting patterns across the ground. As we descended, the air began to hum, a faint vibration that settled into my bones. At the center of the hollow stood a single pillar of glass, taller than a man, its surface rippling, as though it were water. The oracle emerged from within it, not stepped out, emerged, as if the glass had been her skin all along. She was tall, her features sharp, and her eyes faceted like gemstones. When she spoke, her voice was the sound of ice cracking on a winter lake. You carry the shard, she said, her gaze fixed on me. And you, she turned to Aria, you carried it before. 2 vessels, 1 curse. Aria's hand brushed mine, but the bond between us was still muted, like a song heard through a wall. We need to know how to break it, Myra said. The oracle tilted her head. Break? No, the shard cannot be broken. It can only be returned or consumed. Her eyes locked on mine. It is a fragment of Serenya's will. She cast herself into the curse so she could not be destroyed. Now she waits for the vessel strong enough to carry her back to her throne. A cold weight settled in my gut. And if I don't take her there? Then she will take you there, the oracle said simply. She raised a hand, and the glass pillar behind her shimmered. Images swirled within it, visions of 2 paths. In one, I saw myself standing before a black fortress, the curse burning in my veins, my eyes alight with the same cold fire as the guardians. Behind me, the land was ash and bone. In the other, I lay on the ground, blood pooling beneath me, the curse unraveling into smoke. Aria knelt beside me, her face streaked with tears. The oracle's voice was soft. One path ends the curse, the other ends you. Aria stepped forward, her voice tight. There has to be another way. The oracle's gaze shifted to her. There is always another way, but it is not always yours to choose. She looked back at me.
When the moment comes, she will decide, and her choice will bind you both. The glass pillar went still, the visions fading. The oracle stepped back into it, her form dissolving into ripples until she was gone. We stood in silence for a long moment. The hum in the air faded, leaving only the sound of the wind through the crystal shards. Aria's hand found mine, but her grip was hesitant. We'll find a way that doesn't end with you dead. I wanted to believe her, but the images in the glass were burned into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the choice had already been made, somewhere deep inside us, where the curse could reach.
The rain started before dawn, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the forest floor into a slick mess of mud and rotting leaves. We moved in silence, the only sounds the squelch of our boots and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. I could feel the curse more now, not just as a cold weight in my chest, but as a presence, watching, listening, waiting. Sometimes it whispered, just at the edge of hearing, words I couldn't quite make out. Other times it was clearer, a voice that sounded almost like my own. You don't need them. I shook my head, trying to banish it. By midday, the path narrowed between two ridges, the rock walls slick with moss. Aria was ahead of me, her braids swinging with each step. I caught myself staring, not at her, but at the pulse in her neck, the warmth of her blood. The thought wasn't mine. I stumbled, catching myself on the wall. Aria turned, concern flickering in her eyes. "Kael, you're pale." "I'm fine," I lied. She didn't believe me. I could feel it through the bond. Suspicion, worry, and something sharper. That night, we camped in a shallow cave. Myra went to gather water, leaving Aria and me alone. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow. "You're hiding something," she said. I met her gaze. "I'm trying to protect you." "By shutting me out?" Her voice was tight. "I can feel it, Kael. The curse is changing you. You think I don't notice the way you look at me now? The way you hesitate?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She stood, pacing. "If you keep this from me, it's going to win. That's what it wants, to drive us apart." The curse's voice slid into my thoughts, smooth and cold. "She will betray you. She will choose herself when the time comes." I clenched my fists. "You don't know what it's like," I said, my voice rising. "Every moment it's there, pushing, twisting, and if I let you in too far, it might use you against me." Her eyes softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. "Or maybe you're just afraid I'll see how much of you it's already taken." Myra returned before I could answer, her arms full of water skins. She glanced between us, reading the tension in the air, but said nothing. Later, as I lay awake, I felt the curse stir again. This time, it didn't whisper. It laughed, low and quiet, as if it knew it had found the first crack in the wall between us. The Deadwater coast was a place the maps avoided. Even from the ridge above it, the sea looked wrong, black as ink, its surface shifting in slow, unnatural swells. The air was heavy with salt and something sweeter, rotting, that clung to the back of the throat. We descended toward the shore, the sand crunching underfoot like ground bone. The tide whispered as it came in, not the crash of waves, but a low, sibilant murmur, as if the sea itself were speaking in a language older than the wind. Myra stopped at the water's edge. "They'll come to us," she said. "Don't speak unless spoken to, and whatever they ask, remember, the price is never what it seems." The first tide wraith rose from the shallows like a shadow peeling itself from the water. Its form was vaguely human, but its skin shimmered like oil, and its eyes were two pale lanterns in the dark. More followed, circling us in silence. One stepped forward, its voice a ripple across the surface of the sea. "You seek the heart coral." "Yes," Myra said. For a binding ward. The wraith's gaze slid to me. The vessel. I felt the curse stir, cold and eager. What's the price? I asked. The wraith tilted its head. A memory, one you would keep until your last breath. Aria's eyes flicked to mine, confusion and unease in her gaze. Kael? I'll do it, I said, before she could speak. The wraith extended a hand, its fingers long and thin like kelp. When I took it, the world tilted. I was standing in sunlight, the air warm, the scent of wildflowers on the wind. Aria was laughing, her hair loose, her eyes bright. It was the first day we'd met without swords drawn between us. The moment I'd realized she was more than the curse she carried. The wraith's hand tightened, and the memory unraveled like smoke. I tried to hold on to it, but it slipped away, leaving only the echo of warmth I could no longer place. When I opened my eyes, the wraith was gone, and my arrow was holding a piece of crimson coral that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Aria stepped toward me. What did you give them? Nothing that matters, I lied. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded, but I could feel her doubt through the bond. We left the Deadwater coast as the tide whispered behind us, the sound following us long after the Black Sea was out of sight.
The heart coral pulsed faintly in Myra's hands, its glow casting red light across the cave walls. She set it into a shallow bowl carved from black stone, then began to grind it with a pestle of bone. The sound was soft but steady, like a heartbeat. When the paste was ready, she traced it in a spiral over my chest, the cold seeping into my skin. The moment the spiral closed, the curse recoiled, not gone but slowed, its constant pressure easing to a dull throb. Aria let out a breath she'd been holding. It's working! Myra's expression was less certain. For now, the ward will hold, but it's a tether, not a cure, and tethers can snap. We left the cave at dusk, the sky streaked with the last light of day. The air felt lighter, the bond between Aria and me a little clearer, though still muted. She walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed, but there was a hesitation in her movements, as if she wasn't sure whether to close the gap or keep it. We made camp on a rise overlooking the sea. The waves below were dark, but the tide's whisper was gone. I sat apart from the others, staring at the horizon where the water met the sky. That's when I heard her. My heir. The voice was inside my head, smooth and certain. Serenya. You carry me well, better than she did. Soon you will see as I see. And when you do, you will understand why I chose you. I clenched my fists, forcing the words out in a whisper. I'm not yours. Her laughter was soft, almost fond. You've always been mine. You just didn't know it. The bond between Aria and me flickered, a pulse of warmth that pushed back against the cold in my chest. But it wasn't enough to drown out Serenya's voice. When I looked back at the camp, Aria was watching me, her expression unreadable in the firelight. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Serenya's fortress waited, a black silhouette in my mind's eye, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that we were heading there. Not because we wanted to, because the curse was leading us. The wind off the black sand coast carried the taste of iron and rain. Kael walked at the head of the narrow trail, every step pulling him deeper into the pull of Serenya's domain. The ward from the Deadwater still clung to his skin like a thin film of frost, but it was fraying. He could feel her voice brushing against the edges of his mind, testing for a way in. The cliffs rose on one side, jagged and slick with salt spray. On the other, the sea churned in restless swells, each wave striking the rocks with the sound of distant drums. The path itself was little more than a ribbon of stone, winding toward a horizon veiled in mist. Somewhere beyond that veil, the fortress waited. Aria kept pace beside him, her hand brushing his now and then, as if to remind him she was still there. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice was steady, small anchors in the growing storm inside his chest. Once, when the mist thinned, Kael caught sight of it, a silhouette of spires and thorn-crowned walls, impossibly far yet impossibly close, as though the land itself bent to bring it nearer. Behind them, Myra and Rin moved in silence, their eyes scanning the cliffs for movement. Even the gulls had abandoned this stretch of coast. The air was too still, too watchful. Kael's breath came slower, heavier. The bond between him and Aria flickered, not gone, but dim, like a lantern guttering in the wind. He tried to hold on to it, but Serenya's presence pressed closer, a tide rising against the shore. "You're almost home," her voice whispered, soft as the sea foam. Kael's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Not yet. The tide was already turning when they reached the edge of the ruins. Once, this had been a thriving port. Kael could see the bones of it beneath the water. Toppled columns, barnacle-encrusted statues, streets that vanished into the sea. Now it lay half submerged, the air heavy with the scent of brine, and something older, something that had been rotting for centuries. They waited for the tide to draw back, revealing a slick, glistening path of broken stone between the leaning buildings. The water whispered against the walls, but the sound was wrong, too rhythmic, too deliberate. As they stepped into the city, the whispers grew clearer. "Kael." The voices came from the water itself, curling around his ankles like cold fingers. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Pale faces, eyes wide and unblinking, mouths opening in silent pleas. Aria's hand brushed his arm. "Don't look at them," she murmured, but he already had, and they were smiling. The drowned spirits followed them through the flooded streets, their reflections rippling in the water at Kael's feet. They spoke to him in fragments, promises of release, of strength, of an end to the constant pull of the curse. Each word slid into his mind like a blade between ribs. A sudden swell surged through the street, cutting him off from Aria. She stumbled onto a higher step, calling his name, but the water rose between them, dark and thick. The spirits pressed closer, their faces breaking the surface, their hands reaching. "She can't save you," they whispered, "but we can." For a heartbeat, Kael felt the truth of it, the ease of surrender, the quiet that would follow. Then Aria's voice cut through the fog, sharp and certain. "Kael, look at me." He turned. Her eyes were fierce, her hand outstretched across the water. With a growl, he tore himself free of the spirit's grip and waded toward her. The water fought him, dragging at his legs, but he reached her, grasped her hand, and hauled himself onto the step. The whispers faded, but the ward on his skin was almost gone now. He could feel Serenya's presence pressing closer, like a storm just beyond the horizon. The storm rolled in fast. One moment the sky was a dull, bruised gray. The next, black clouds boiled over the headland, the wind lashing salt spray into their faces. The path narrowed to a knife edge of rock, the sea roaring far below. Kael led the way, but every step felt heavier. The ward was almost gone now. He could feel Serenya's presence pressing against his thoughts like a hand on the back of his neck. The bond with Aria was a faint thread, fraying with each gust of wind. When they reached a shallow overhang for shelter, Myra called a halt. Rin busied himself checking their gear, but Aria stood apart, her back to Kael, staring out at the churning sea. "You're letting her in," she said without turning. Kael's jaw tightened. "I'm fighting her every step." "Are you?" She turned then, eyes sharp. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're listening." The wind howled through the rocks, but her words cut deeper. "You think I want this? You think I don't feel her clawing at me every moment? I'm holding her back for you." "For me?" Aria's voice rose. "Or because you're afraid of what happens if you stop?" The curse stirred at the sound of her anger, cold and eager. "She doubts you. She will leave you." Kael took a step toward her. "You don't understand." "I understand enough," she said, her voice shaking now.
I understand that if you keep shutting me out, she's going to win. And when she does, I'll lose you before I ever get the chance to save you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm raged around them, the air thick with salt and unspoken words. Finally, Kael looked away. "Maybe you should keep your distance, until we reach the fortress." Her breath caught, but she nodded once sharply and stepped back. The thread of the bond dimmed further until it was barely there at all. Myra returned from scouting ahead, her eyes flicking between them. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. That night, they camped in silence, the storm easing to a steady rain. Kael lay awake, staring into the dark, feeling the curse settle deeper into his bones. Somewhere in the quiet, Serenya's voice purred. "Closer now."
The fire had burned down to embers. The others slept, their breathing slow and even, but Kael lay awake, staring at the silver-lit waves. The ward's protection was a thin veil now. He could feel Serenya's presence pressing against it, patient and certain. The sound of the sea shifted. The crash of waves softened into a rhythm like a heartbeat. The moonlight seemed to brighten, spilling across the sand until it formed the outline of a woman. Serenya stepped from the light. She was not the shadow-wreathed queen he had glimpsed before. Tonight, she looked almost human. Her hair loose, her gown simple, her eyes carrying the weight of centuries. "I wasn't always what you see," she said, her voice low, almost fragile. "Once I was mortal. I loved, I bled, I trusted." Images bloomed in the air between them. A younger Serenya laughing in a sunlit courtyard, then kneeling beside a man with a blade in his back. The same man who, moments before, had sworn to protect her. "They betrayed me," she whispered. "Those I would have died for. And when the world turned its back, I forged the curse, not to conquer, but to survive." She stepped closer, the tide swirling around her bare feet. "You are my second chance, Kael. You know what it is to be hunted, to be feared for what you carry inside. I can give you the strength to protect her, to protect them all. No one will ever take from you again." Her hand lifted, palm open. "All I ask is that you stop fighting me. Stand at my side, and the world will kneel." For a moment, Kael saw it. Himself crowned, the war ended, Aria safe in a world no one could threaten. The bond between him and Aria flickered faintly, as if sensing the pull. He reached toward Serenya's hand, and the vision shattered. The moonlight dimmed. The cove was empty again, save for the hiss of the tide and the cold sweat on his skin. Kael sat there until dawn, unsure if what he'd seen was truth or just another snare. By morning, the tide had pulled back to reveal the causeway, a jagged spine of stone stretching toward the fortress. Mist clung to the air, and the black towers loomed higher with every step, their windows like watching eyes. The magic here was thick, clinging to the skin, humming in Kael's bones. The curse inside him resonated with it, each step forward like walking deeper into a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Aria moved closer, her hand brushing his. For the first time in days, the bond between them flared bright, a sudden rush of warmth and clarity that cut through the cold pull of Serenya's voice. He looked at her, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just that connection. Then the whisper came, "Come home." It was not a plea, it was a summons. Mare's voice was low. "We cross now, or we wait for the tide to trap us." Kael's gaze lingered on the fortress gates. He could feel Serenya's presence there, waiting. Aria's fingers tightened around his. "Together," she said. They stepped onto the causeway. The sea churned on either side, waves slamming against the rocks. The magic in the air thickened, and each step forward making Kael's pulse quicken.
Halfway across, the gates began to open, slow, deliberate, as if the fortress itself had been expecting them. Kael's grip on Aria's hand didn't falter. They crossed the threshold together.
The gate sealed behind them with a deep, resonant thud. The air inside was colder than the mist outside, heavy with the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic, like blood long dried. The hall stretched ahead, its walls of black stone veined with living vines that pulsed faintly, as though carrying a heartbeat. At the far end, a throne rose from the floor itself, wrought from twisted iron and thorned branches, its crown-like spines reaching toward the vaulted ceiling. And then she was there. Serenya stepped from the shadows, as if she had always been part of them. Her presence was overwhelming, not just seen, but felt, pressing against Kael's skin, sliding into his thoughts. Her eyes caught the dim light and held it, turning it into something sharp. "Welcome home," she said, her voice a low, rich current that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his bones. Kael's breath caught. The curse inside him surged, eager, as if recognizing its source. She lifted a hand, and the vines along the walls shifted, curling toward her like loyal hounds. "Now, take your place." The crown appeared in her other hand, black metal twined with living thorns, each tipped with a bead of crimson light. Aria moved before Kael could answer, stepping between them. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white around the hilt of her blade. "If he takes that crown, you'll have him, and I will not survive in a world where Kael is lost to you." Serenya's smile was slow, almost pitying. "You think you can stand between us? You've already lost him. He just hasn't admitted it yet." The bond between Kael and Aria flared suddenly, a surge of heat and light that pushed back against Serenya's presence. Kael staggered, caught between the pole of the curse and the anchor of that connection. Serenya's eyes narrowed. "Interesting." The vines along the walls writhed, thorns lengthening, the air thickening with magic. Kael's pulse thundered. The crown was inches from his grasp. Aria's hand was inches from his own. The choice was no longer about surrender or resistance. It was about whether he could turn the very thing meant to enslave him into the weapon that would break her. The crown's thorns gleamed in Serenya's hand, each tip pulsing with a bead of crimson light. The vines along the walls writhed, their thorns lengthening, the air thickening until every breath felt like swallowing glass. Kael's fingers hovered inches from the crown. The curse inside him surged, a living current eager to be claimed. "Take it," Serenya whispered, her voice a silk thread winding around his thoughts. "End the war. Save her. Save them all." Aria's voice cut through, raw and unshaken. "Kael, look at me." He did, and in her eyes he saw no fear, no doubt, only the fierce, unyielding belief that he was more than the thing inside him. The bond between them flared, a sudden blaze of light and shadow that slammed into Serenya's presence like a wave against stone. Kael gasped as the curse bucked inside him, torn between two masters. He made his choice. With a roar, Kael seized the crown, not to wear it, but to turn it into a conduit. He drove the curse outward, not into himself, but into the bond with Aria. The effect was instant. Light and shadow exploded from them both, the vines shrieking as they withered, the hall shuddering under the force. Serenya staggered, her form fracturing like glass under a hammer. "You think you can burn me out?" she hissed, her voice splintering into echoes. Kael's grip on the crown tightened, his other hand locked with Aria's. The bond burned painfully bright now, threatening to consume them both, but Aria refused to let go.
"You don't own him," she said, her voice steady even as the magic tore at her. "You never did." The storm of light and shadow reached a breaking point. Serenya's scream was part fury, part something almost like grief, before her form shattered completely, dissolving into 1,000 shards of darkness that the light devoured. The crown crumbled to ash in Kael's hands. The vines fell still. The air was suddenly, impossibly quiet. Kael swayed, the bond between him and Aria still glowing hot, but steadying. The curse was gone.
The silence after Serenya's scream was almost worse than the battle. Kael's breath came ragged, the taste of iron in his mouth. The crown was gone, nothing but ash drifting from his fingers. And the vines that had once pulsed with her will now hung limp, their thorns crumbling to dust. A deep groan shuddered through the stone beneath their feet. The fortress was dying. "Move!" Mayra's voice snapped them back to motion. She and Rin were already at the far doors, hauling them open against the weight of collapsing stone. Kael staggered, the bond with Aria still burning hot in his chest. She was at his side instantly, her arm around him, steadying him as the floor split in jagged cracks. They ran. The great hall fell away behind them, swallowed by a roar of seawater as the tide surged in through shattered walls. The causeway was already slick with spray, the sea clawing at its edges. Halfway across, a tower gave way with a scream of stone, crashing into the waves. The spray drenched them, cold and stinging, but they didn't stop until their boots hit the black sand shore. They turned just in time to see the fortress sink into the sea, its last spire vanishing beneath the churning water. The mist closed over it, as if it had never been there at all. Kael stood there, chest heaving, the bond between him and Aria no longer a fragile thread, but a steady, warm pulse. The walls he'd built around himself were gone, burned away in the breaking. He looked at her, and for once didn't hold back. "From the start, it's always been you," he said, voice rough. Her answering smile was small but fierce. She took his hand and didn't let go. When they returned to the Pax territory, the others were waiting, a wall of familiar faces, relief and pride in their eyes. The welcome was loud, but Kael barely heard it, because Aria was at his side, not as a guest, not as a fragile bond to be guarded, but as Luna.